this just isn't working for me. Like, and Mando, do you actually get business from LinkedIn? Because I feel like at this point it's a big facade because I can't get one client.
Like there's so many advisors on here, it's oversaturated. Like how do I actually see success? Like when there's a DM and you only see the first 50 characters of the most recent message, you want that part to stand out, right? So if that part of
Ah,
your message is like, hi name, nice to connect, whatever, whatever, and it's the same as every other message that's in their inbox, it doesn't stand out. When conversations are slow moving, just ask bold questions and that can move a lot of them forward.
you could do 50 cold outreach every single day and they could be garbage, or you could do 10 that are really good conversations.
They're consistently able to add at least 2 to 3 ideal clients every month. The reply rates that most of the advisors I work with get is anywhere from 40 to 50%. So that's like the actual DM reply rate for anyone that uses the strategy I'm about to talk about here.
Now, today, let's get into the call. We are going to get super tactical today on messaging, on outreach. And I have my boy Ritvik here. I hope I didn't butcher your name. I hope that was
Oh,
close enough.
perfect.
But
Perfect.
he's here today. He's someone that we actually were both, I believe we met from Matt's
Yeah.
group, who we were coached by the same business coach in the past, a couple years ago. And that's how we first came across each other. And we've really just interacted here and there through LinkedIn over time. And it's funny now, he does. I mean, I'll let you talk more about what you do
Yeah.
and your backstory, but I would say your superpower is like you know how to get in front of people with messaging in a very tasteful way. And anybody who's good at that, I'm just fascinated by it because I think anytime we can improve that, get new ideas around it, it's the most powerful force multiplier in growing your business, building your brand. So, anyways, that's why I brought you in today. I will let you first, though, tell a little bit about your story and what's led up to
Yeah.
today, just so people have a background.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the introduction. So, I mean, the first thing I'll say, like in terms of the background, so I've kind of been in sales and marketing for a long time, like as long as I can kind of remember. But really, the biggest piece is that I started working with a medical marketing company. And when you first get into the marketing space with marketing agencies, all that stuff, you see all the automations and a lot of pitchy stuff, a lot of salesy stuff. And in the end, like the services we were selling, it's a very high trust industry. Obviously, it's like $10,000, $20,000 a month retainer marketing services. And so what I did that kind of was different and was why I was able to have success there was by focusing on relationships, right? So even though it was on LinkedIn, it was still online. My bread and butter was LinkedIn. But with that, having a real relationship with every single prospect I talked to and getting to the point where each prospect knew that I really cared about them, I really knew their problems, and I was able to solve them, that was the piece that was allowed me to have success. Now coming into how I started working with wealth advisors specifically. So I studied finance in college. I was going to go into investment banking, but just because of the success I was having and, kind of the sales side, I opted not to. When I decided to kind of split off and use the strategy I learned to help, someone else in my own business, wealth advisors was just the natural, transition for me. My dad's actually in the wealth advisory space as well. And so I helped some people that he knew, and that worked out because the strategy is very natural there. And just over time, just constantly kind of iterating it. So that's like the broad background. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to add,
No,
but
that's great. So let's get into like a big thing that I hear from some people in the community and even advisors that I just know that aren't in my community. They're like, "Man, I've been posting content. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sending messages. This just isn't working for me." Like, and Mondo, do you actually get business from LinkedIn? Because I feel like at this point it's a big facade because I can't get one client. And I'm sure
yeah,
you've even had people say this
100%.
to you
Yeah.
before, bro. But I want to go down to the simplest level, like because I believe you would agree with what I'm about to say, but I remember even from other places I've gotten coaching, I know people who have never made a LinkedIn post, do
Yeah.
really good outreach, and they get clients there all day. So like
Yeah.
let's say my content's not really rolling. Let's say I'm struggling to foster engagement. What could I do today to start getting in front of people and having productive conversations?
Yeah, it's a great point. And as you said, like I hear the same thing over and over again, right? Like probably almost every single person that I've spoken to, like who's never gotten a client on LinkedIn, will say something along the same lines. Like there's so many advisors on here, it's oversaturated. Like, how do I actually see success? The biggest piece that I say is that if you're posting content, I'm not against content, obviously, right? I know content's great and all that. But if you're not starting conversations, then you're losing out on the actual one-to-one piece that actually moves, client relationships forward, right? So like obviously in this industry, I'm pretty sure everybody here would agree that it's one of the most relationship-based industries out there, if not the most. And so as a result of that, I'd say like to answer your question, the first step that anybody can do is go into the DMs, look for like either it's people you already know that have engaged with your content, like that's obviously an easy step. But even if you're on Sales Navigator, and I'm sure we can talk about that later, but when you go and approach a conversation, I'd say the first piece to fix has nothing to do with even what you're going to write or what type of DM to send. The first switch you want to make is in your mindset. I think the big mistake most advisors make is that if they're DMing or if they're on LinkedIn, they treat it very transactionally, right? Where it's like, okay, I need to find the best pitch or I need to kind of figure out how I can sell this person. What I tell every single person I work with or every single advisor is that you first need to understand that you should approach a conversation not even kind of wanting to sell, right? And obviously I'll get the pushback like, oh, it's pointless or, what's the point? I'm going to waste my time. But really, that's not what it's about, right? Like I always use the statement where you want to approach a conversation not wanting to sell without knowing anything about the other person, right? That's kind of the piece that I think most people go wrong with, which is why LinkedIn doesn't work because once you understand that if you're starting a real conversation, you're getting to actually understand people, you're getting them to know you and you're getting to know them, then the trust is built where now it actually makes sense to even talk about business, right? Especially in an industry like this where the relationships are so important, right? Like if you're selling something for $100, it's much different than, the services that we're talking about here. So that's the
Right.
first piece I would say. Obviously, we can get into the nitty gritty as well in terms of
Yeah. Yeah, like let's even keep going. I think the part to even double down is like let's assume I don't have engagement on my content.
yeah.
And like where do I start? Like how do I find
Cool. Yeah.
someone to DM? Like let's go there.
Yeah, for sure. So obviously the biggest piece is Sales Navigator. And look, like with Sales Navigator, I hear a lot of advisors give me the feedback that it's like, oh, I've never been able to figure it out, or, how does it actually work? So I'll boil it down the way I've seen success over and over again with, all the advisors I've worked
And
with.
feel free to share your screen too, bro, if you want to at any point in time, by the way.
Okay, cool, for sure. So in general, right, like with Sales Navigator, the mistake most people make is that they'll kind of use the in-mails, which I would recommend you actually don't use in-mails at all. And the reason being is that you want to approach, as I said, the conversation's not wanting to sell. So you also have to come across not in a salesy manner, right? So the first thing I'd say is you want to get incredibly clear on like who your ideal client actually is, right? And I'm pretty sure everybody would agree that that's an important step. But I would
Yep.
go a lot deeper than just the surface level, like, okay, industry or demographic or, kind of AUM range. Obviously, those factors are important. For the conversations that we have, what's even more important than that is understanding the personality of the people that are actually going to give you like, your dream book of business. The psychographic factors, the emotional factors that drive them, right? The pain points that are really, really relevant to them. That's what makes much more of a difference than honestly any conversation strategy. Until you have that clarity, it's going to be very hard for you to have those conversations because, like for you, for example, when you're talking to somebody in your ICP, they know that you can see all their problems, right? You kind of know all their problems before they even surface them, and that builds an insane amount of trust. So I'd say that's definitely the first piece. And then in terms of like the actual specifics, so if we're on Sales Navigator, all you have to do is really just boil down like the people you're working with from a surface level. You don't actually want to make your Sales Navigator list as specific as possible because then you're
Okay.
kind of gonna draw. So the difference we say is like there's a dream follower and then there's an ideal client, right? So what you want to do is you want to send connections to what we call your dream follower, which is someone who may not be ready to be a client now, but as they become a part of your network, maybe they see your content, maybe they have a few conversations with you, they kind of get to the point where now they're ready to be a client, right? Because look, the reality is like if for people that are out there that, really know they need an advisor, they're already your ideal client, they probably would have already gone out and found one, right? So really the way the DMs work is that you want to go after the people where, what they could potentially get help with, but they may not be ready yet or they may not understand that yet. And that's what the conversation piece is important for. So in terms of Sales Navigator, obviously like we can talk about the whole setup. That might take some more time. But once you have that list set up where like you've gotten at least pretty, niche down on the types of people you broadly want to work with, I
Can we do
always
like an example, like way you would search? Because I think like a lot
let's
of
do that.
feedback
Yeah.
I think a lot of feedback I get is like, what do I even look for? What do I search for people? Like, what does that look like? Like, and you don't have
Okay.
to obviously go a million ways in depth, but like even just at a basic level, so we have a
Yeah.
direction, you know?
Here, let's do this. Let's just build a list. Like if I was building a list for you, like
Hmm.
what type, at least
Yeah.
broadly, I don't know everything about your ICP. Or maybe I'll just do this the way I'd walk through with you, right? So like give me a broad understanding of the people that you generally like to work with most.
Yeah, so where it's evolved to now, Ritvik, is my ideal clients are they're like what I would call like suddenly wealthy. So they've either had a lot of stock that's like company stock that's really appreciated, or the company went public.
Okay,
They get a big bonus, like investment bankers. I have a few clients that like they get a massive bonus and it's like
gotcha.
70% of their income every year.
Okay.
Or a business owner that their wealth is largely tied up in the business, or they sold the business and now it's like, what do I do with all this cash?
Okay, perfect. So that's definitely quite like some good examples there. And what I'll do is I'll boil down to like one of those examples because like the way I
Yeah.
like to do it is I'd like to split it into like if I was doing all three of those, I would make that three separate lists so we're not all like kind of mixed
Yep.
up. So for
Yep.
example, let's say I'm focusing on the tech side of that, right? I mean,
Yep.
really like what I say is you want to start from the top and like niche down when you think about the filters. So first
Hmm.
step, let's say you're working with people all over the country, right? Let's say we're talking about technology. That's the second step is the industry, right?
Hmm.
This is a little trick. It's very like a specific one, but I recommend you like copy the word, the keyword, and then you can just kind of keep copy and pasting it and implement every single one. Uh,
Got it.
so that's a very small trick that I recommend. Let me see any of these. Okay, that should be enough there. And then the other piece is like when we generally talk about, for example, like people that would have equity compensation, obviously very common for a lot of the advisors that I work with. The one thing that we really like to do is years in current company, right? So generally speaking, you'd probably want to do something like this type of filter. And again, like I don't want people to niche it down too much because then you're going to drawn out a lot of people who maybe need the help or maybe don't even know they need the help, but they'll get to that point eventually, right? That's kind of the way that the relationship building works. So once we do that, the other piece is definitely the seniority level, right? So usually like entry level, for most of the people I work with, maybe that's not the focus. Maybe they're not there yet. But definitely like people in this, experienced manager, senior, strategic. Strategic's a little bit different. Director is a very common one we like to focus on. Vice president. So I'm sure like these are certain seniority levels a lot of people here would love to work with, or at least that's the general target that they think about. And then the other thing is the company headcount. I think this is a really important piece, especially if you're focusing on, as you said, like people with equity compensation, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, this is an important piece. So I would say like I would honestly start at 1,000 and just work my way up. So you can see here, basically the way I treat this is like I start at the top and then I niche down. But again, you don't want to niche down too much because that'll happen a lot where you'll just be so niche that it's like you're not really going to get many people that are kind of ready to go. The other thing that's really important. So this toggle I love using. And look, obviously I get it. Like a lot of people feel like it's going to niche it down too much. But the reason we do this is because now every single person you connect with, every single person you DM is active on the platform. You already know that. You already know that they're going to be using LinkedIn. And I strongly recommend using that, right? And especially it kind of depends on your niche, especially if you're going after business owners, it's even more effective. But this is, I feel like, a really big, powerful tool or like filter that makes a
Yep.
difference. So honestly, I wouldn't even filter it much more than this. Like this is a general filter that I would put, let's say if I was going after people with equity compensation that have some type of, confusion there or some type of help that they could use. Just some small tidbits that I'll throw in here is like I definitely recommend doing this. So like all my saved leads, I would exclude this, and then I would also exclude both of these. The reason we do this is so that now once you save the list, every time you open it up, you're going to get new people in the list, right? You're not going to keep seeing the same people over and over again. So for example, if I was to connect with somebody here, you see this save as lead box, you can leave that checked. So then now once I send the invitation, they won't be on the list anymore. Uh,
Got it.
so that's a little trick that works. So, and then kind of going a step further into, I know you're talking about the actual workflow, like how do we even go about this? I recommend everybody, this is sometimes controversial, I don't think it should be, to send blank connection requests. I don't recommend
I
anybody.
recommend that too. So we're on the same page.
Okay, cool. Because like, look, like, and it kind of goes back to what I said before. Because when you see somebody with, and look, if it's someone you know, that's a little bit different, or you have some type of connection. But we're talking about cold outreach here, right? When you're going after people, and like, if they can see that you're putting a note in the connection request, everyone here probably gets something like that in their LinkedIn all day long. You kind of push it away because you kind of know it's a sales, right? You know that it's just about selling. And I don't want it to come across that way, as we said, right? You want your mindset to be like, I want to learn about this person. There's someone who I've worked with in the past. If I can help them, I will. And if not, then it's totally okay. I made a new connection.
Yep.
And that's kind of the mindset we keep. So after this, once you have your sales navigator, it's really straightforward. Like you get 200 requests for the week. I recommend everybody max that out because you want to take all of your at bats. If we think about the numbers, The average acceptance rate you'll probably get with blank requests anywhere from like 30, and if you have strong content, for you it might be like higher than that, might be like 80%. I don't know. Um, but
Mine usually is around like 50 to 60%, which is
yeah,
obviously going to be higher than average just because of my
exactly.
content, you know?
Okay, that makes sense. That's really great, by the way. But yeah, so then like anywhere from like I'd say 25 to 30% you can expect, and then from there, obviously we can talk about the actual DM strategy. I'm happy to show examples as well.
Yeah, yeah,
But
keep
that's
going.
the
This is great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can just keep going now then. So then once you send out your request, right? When we get into like actually sending DMs, I mean, so I'll tell you, I'll back up a little bit. The reply rates that most of the advisors I work with get is anywhere from 40 to 50%. So that's like the actual DM reply rate for anyone that uses the strategy I'm about to talk about here. And the reason that happens is because again, like there's no pitch in that message. There's no offering or asking for a call immediately. It's really just about starting a conversation very casually, right? And obviously there's a piece that go on top of that in terms of how we're going to eventually convert that. It's not like we're just, doing it for no reason. But let me pull up a few examples here. I actually went right to it. So this is just a kind of sample initial outreach database from like some of the advisors I've worked with. And there's a lot of pieces that go into it, right? But like when we talk about initial outreach, the first thing I say is that you want to have as casual tonality as possible, right? I don't recommend you come across really formal or very professional or kind of suit and tie like an email. I think that's one place a lot of people go wrong because look, the goal is that you want to stand out from everybody else that's, sending this person messages on LinkedIn, right? You want it to be very unique, and that's what's going to make them click on it and actually look into it. The second piece is you want to be as specific as possible, right? So this is something that takes time. Like I tell every advisor I work with, like I want you to expect that this is going to be something that's very quick and simple and you're going to get going easily. But again, it's a muscle like anything else, right? I'm sure you'd agree the same thing with writing content. When you start off, it's a little bit harder. The more you do it, the quicker it gets, right? So now like people that I work with for a long time, they may be able to send a message like this out in just a minute and a half, you know? So that's the other piece though, like being as specific as possible. And then the third thing is that you really want to make sure that your question is easy to answer. I think the mistake a lot of advisors make early on in this type of messaging strategy is they'll ask really good questions, but that's more of a question you would ask like once you already know a person, right? Like maybe asking about their background, asking about, where they're at philosophically in their life or something like that. That's a question you kind of want to hold off on. If you look at these questions, and okay, again, like you want to know your ICP, right? Like if you're working on a younger ICP, you may be a little bit more like on the casual side. There's a balance
Mhm.
there that you want to hit. But for example, right, like casual greetings, right? And the one thing that I say is that you want to mix in something about their profession, but the most important message to have is something that's personal, right? And that'll lead into the whole conversation strategy that obviously I can talk about as well. But those
Mhm.
personal conversations are what stands out most. You'll see in every single example here, there's something personal that these guys have used that have led to a good conversation. For example, talking about location is great, right? Because people love the place they're from. It's very unique. Like honestly, people don't do it on LinkedIn nearly enough when you're starting conversations, and so it stands out. Talking about posts, right? If the other person has posts, like as we're turning on the post on LinkedIn toggle, that's a great thing to do. You'll notice again, location is going to come up. So overall, like the way you want to approach this is that your questions are also easy to answer. Where, for example, like in this one, he's just kind of clarifying, right? It's like I have a client
Mhm.
at Meta and AI too. Like you just made the switch recently, right? I know it's crazy times. And then, by the way, do you have any coffee recs in the Bay Area? So it's a very casual, lighthearted conversation where when somebody sees this, they're not immediately turned away like, oh, this person's going to sell me something, right? Or this person just wants to get something out of me. And look, like there's going to be situations where people may feel that. But the one thing I say is you want to keep your mindset the same, where it's like, I'm here to start conversations. I'm here to see if I can even help people in the first place. And then after that, we'll see what happens. And I can talk about that whole questioning strategy as well. But
Yeah, and I'll even show an example real quick if I could replace
yeah,
the share. Like
sure.
on that point,
Second.
I'm
There we go.
I'm constantly I'm constantly just starting it's something I talk about all the time. Like max your connection requests out. Just message the people who accept it and be like, hey, thanks for connecting. Have a great week. Because when they
Yeah.
respond, then they're now in your funnel from LinkedIn's algorithm and
Yeah.
your content's going to be in front of them. But I'll just even give an example. Like this dude who one of my go-to things, I'm like, hey, thanks for viewing my profile. You just stopping by or do you have any questions? Which I don't even think this is like a high level, amazing question to reach out and say, but it puts you in the game and it's low effort. And he's mentioned a post, whatever he viewed my profile again, so I reached out. He's like, I'm in Banff. I'm like, dude, show me what that looks like because it's
Yeah.
totally AI there and it's not even a real place. And by the way, he sends me this picture of his wife and his kid, which, like, by the way, that totally looks like AI and it's a real picture, which is crazy to me. But my
Yeah.
point is, if you have enough conversations with people like this and they're tuning into your content, this dude has never liked the post of mine also, but he's clearly reading my stuff. You are naturally going to get people that like it's just more friends who know what you do that could end up being your clients. So, anyways, Rivik, keep going. And if you want to get into that questioning strategy, like I think that'd be
Yeah.
super great to get tactical there.
Yeah, 100%. But no, I love that. And the one thing I wanted to say there also is like, look, like when you have those personal conversations, people love those so much more. And I actually go back to this thing that I shared here. Um, like you'll notice this is one really small tidbit. Like this is the real sauce that I'm gonna give out here. Every single one of these messages, like the personal thing is the most recent message here, right? And I'll tell you why that matters. Because when you have a message, and also this is four different messages, right? This isn't just like one paragraph. That's a big piece. The reason I say that is because if you look at LinkedIn and you look at like what we call the preview text, like when there's a DM and you only see the first 50 characters of the most recent message, you want that part to stand out, right? So if that part of
Ah.
your message is like, hi name, nice to connect, whatever, whatever, and it's the same as every other message that's in their inbox, it doesn't stand out, no matter how good of a message you have later on, right? I know it gets a little bit confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. Where it's like,
So let me make sure I'm understanding. So what you're doing is you're sending, "Hey name, nice to connect." That's one message, two message,
enter. Yeah.
message three right in a row, like back to back
Yeah.
to back. Message three is something about their work that's just like a simple thing like you have here. And then
Yeah.
message four, which is the last one, is the city or
Person.
town or area first because they're going to
Yeah.
see that and think like I have to open this
Yeah.
because it just catches their eye because like you said,
Exactly.
people like to talk about where they're from.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way. And look, even if it's not like city or town, obviously in this example it is like one thing that is great for this is sports, right? So people have things about sports on their profile. If they have anything related to hobbies, interests, anything that's really personal that people are like, look, when you look at someone's profile and they have their interests and their hobbies in their bio, let's say they do, or they have some posts, you know what's like what they're going to be interested in, right? You already know the types of things that they like, right? Like if somebody shoots you a message about the Steelers, like you're going to be interested because that's something you're passionate about. You know what I mean? So using those things, you want to use those all to your advantage. And yeah, you want that to be the most recent message because in the LinkedIn inbox, that's what's going to stand out here, in that preview text. So that's a really small piece. But when I look at the reply rates that all the advisors I've worked with have gotten, that's the one of the strongest drivers of like really getting high reply rates.
Okay.
Cool. So that's the initial outreach piece. And again, like we can go through a bunch of other examples as well. Obviously, there's
I
so
think it
many.
would be helpful to even go over maybe two or three other examples, honestly.
Okay, cool. So what I'll do, actually, let me run through a full conversation, honestly, like one that just converted into a client.
Yeah,
Um,
let's do it. I think the bottom line is like more conversations equals more money at the end of the day. And it's, you kind of
yeah,
have to be, it's like you kind of have to think, how could I be different than everyone else that's in their inbox is really like the underlying theme.
that's the biggest piece. I say that all the time. Like every single thing you do, you don't want to sound like every other advisor because look, like if you think about these people, I mean, there's already, there's 20 advisors in here, or maybe some of those are note takers, but with that, like the biggest piece is that they're getting these messages all day long, right? And that's really what you want to differentiate from. I have this up now. My Figma gets really convoluted. There we go. Okay, cool. So this is a shorter conversation. I know it doesn't seem that way, but this is one that I can actually run through
Yeah.
from
Go
start
ahead.
to finish, right? In terms of like if we have time for this, it won't take too long.
Yeah,
Um,
dude, go
but
for it. I think that'd be
I
valuable.
Okay, cool. So really, when we talk about like, and this is, I'm picked a specific example because look, as I said, there's different niches. The biggest thing that I say when we go to the niche point is that you need to know the pain points. You need to know the general pain points of what somebody in your niche goes through, right? Obviously, like as you talked about with those ones, the people who have like a change coming, or like a sudden wealth kind of shift, that's a big pain point, obviously, right? And then maybe when you go to people who are in tech, equity comp is a big one. For medical niche, there's different ones, whatever the case may be, but you have to have that strong understanding, right? So I'm going to start from initial outreach and I'll run through quickly like how the conversation actually progresses because let me put it this way. The questions or the problems that most advisors face when they try to do the DMs, obviously getting replies in the first place is one. We kind of covered that a little bit. The second piece is having a natural conversation where it doesn't feel forced, right? That's a very common problem where like people feel like, oh, what do I even say? Like this person knows I'm going to sell them something. How do we solve that? I'll cover that a little bit. The third piece is like, how do I transition a conversation from something that's just casual, like kind of the conversation you were showing me there, where it's like on the personal side, into something that's actually going to drive like business for me? Like, obviously, that's important. The actual financial piece of it. How do we do that, right? That's the third one. And then the fourth piece is also like how do I make sure that by the time I get on this call with this person, it's not just like a connection call or something that's not that saying that's a bad thing, but obviously the goal is that we want to book discovery calls and convert as many prospects as possible. So that's what, and actually, I think the equity comp example is going to be better for this one. There we go. It's a little bit shorter as well, but yeah. So those are the main like pain points that I think people face the most often. So
Yep.
let's start off with this, right? This is actually the same initial outreach example I just showed over there. It's actually it looks like it's different, but I guess yeah, it's still meta, but anyways. So really like with the initial outreach again, you want to have that greeting and you want to mention something that's related to their profession, but your question should be casual. It shouldn't really be on the like finance side or anything too crazy. Just simple like, oh, like, what are you working on? You saw on their profile, oh, you're working on wearables, right? That's cool. Okay. So that's one piece there. Um, and then again, like talking about the location, that's always a good thing to mention. And now when you have this conversation with somebody, the easiest thing I can tell you is that you want to approach the conversation the same way you would in person, right? I'm sure a lot of you guys go to networking events or whatever the case may be. And, this is something I hear all the time from advisors. Like, I'm really good in person, but I don't really know how to convert that onto LinkedIn. The easiest answer is you do the same thing, right? You have the same types of conversations. When you walk up to someone at a networking event, you're not just immediately going to jump in asking them about their equity compensation plan, right? You're going to have some sort of conversation. So the way this works is like as you have that back and forth, you can kind of have two conversations at one time, right? That's a big piece of it where you're talking about their profession and kind of asking them questions. They're just digging a little bit deeper, understanding where they're at in their career right now, and then also something on the personal side, right? Like as we are saying, we're talking about San Francisco and the wharf a little bit here. This advisor, the gold is the advisor and the gray is the prospect, just to clear that up. Um, Again, kind of moving on, one of the most important pieces of the conversation to make it feel natural is always referencing personal connections, right? So in this situation, it's talking about how I have a client that's at Meta as well. Or a lot of cases, like, if something comes up where it's like, oh, I just have a family member that's also in this career path, or I know someone that, whatever, it could be a friend, it could be yourself, right? The more you can relate to your prospects so they know that you understand their world, that makes the most difference. Um, so that's basically what's happening here. Mentioning the client, how, the advisor also has a client that's at Meta. That builds a lot of trust, obviously, right? And I think that's a case for a lot of people who work with folks in tech. Um, and then moving on, right? We were also talking about the personal conversation. This is always a good thing to mention. Like, people ask about your favorite food, your, favorite coffee spots. If we're talking about sports, that's such an easy conversation to happen. Unfortunately, I'm a Jets fan, so I actually avoid talking about sports because it makes me very depressed. But other than that, that's something that's always good to do. So again, as we kind of move on here. One of the important things to recognize, and I brought this up because this is a shorter conversation. Obviously, they're all different lengths. But for example, if we're talking about equity compensation, now you have an easy way to start that topic, right? Because you built a relationship, you built some trust, you've showed that you already have a client that's at the same company. Now, right, the simplest way that this advisor does it, he just say, oh, I was just chatting with my client actually about RSUs. Like, do you also have those, right? So look, like if you ask this question in the very beginning, that was gonna be like, why is this person asking me this? Like, I'm not interested in his services. But you didn't do that, right? You built at least some sort of rapport there where now it's like it has a little bit more justification in terms of asking that question. Obviously, it's never perfect, right? No outreach is ever going to be perfect, but just understanding if that RSU equity compensation topic is even relevant. And then here he says, like, yeah, I do have that equity compensation, right? And now, like, the way we get into questioning, obviously, I can talk about it for hours and hours, but the
Yeah.
simplest thing I can say is that you want to treat it as consistently diving deeper into the pain point, right? Instead of going a mile wide into everything about this person's life, which I'm sure if you bring them on as a client, you can talk about that then. But in terms of getting your foot in the door, like you even said it when I asked you about your, like, the example of the clients you're working with, it's like this sudden, change in wealth. Obviously, there's so many things that come with that, but that one piece is what gets them really interested. Like, I have this change that I need to get solved and everything else that comes with that, right? So you need to find that one specific pain point. So that the way we do that is we start broad with our questions and we get more specific as we go along the conversation, right? So again, here it's just like, oh, like have they been straightforward, like with vesting and all of that? And again, like the fact that you already have a client in the space, again, that's why a niche is so
It
important because
helps.
it builds that trust. You hinted those pain points. Now, as we go, um, this prospect here mentions that there's lots of layers with vesting, timing, and taxes, but nothing urgent. So look, like this is gonna happen all the time. People are if they haven't already like gone to an advisor and like felt that this was a big problem, it's not necessarily going to be very easy to convert them, right? You have to show them why that's a problem. You have to show the gap, right? Like as we talk about in sales, it's like their current state and then their desired state, and the gap in between is what you want to solve. So that's the exact same thing we're doing here. But again, the biggest piece is when you're doing questions, you want to go deeper, as I said. So you start with just taking what the prospect said and diving deeper into that. So here he says there's lots of layers, right? So it's like, oh, like that could be a pain point, right? Like he knows there's lots of layers. He hasn't necessarily solved them yet, but what does he mean by that, right? So then just asking, like, how do you navigate those? Like, I know that was a problem for the client I had. Here he goes, like, mostly just the internal resources and rough planning. Okay. So this, like, when you see something, and it's blurry because LinkedIn, whatever, screenshots are blurry, but when someone says rough planning, right, as an advisor, you know it's like, oh, well, rough planning isn't necessarily the way you want to kind of live your life, right? And that's what you now dive into. So here, just diving deeper, it's like, oh, like, what do you mean by rough planning? Like, have you had any surprises with taxes yet? Right? He says, like, taxes haven't been anything crazy, but that's partly timing and partly luck. So then this is another piece. If you have someone who, as a prospect, is telling you as an advisor that their strategy relies on luck, that's going to be something that you want to dive deeper on, right? It's like, oh, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be luck based, right? You just haven't necessarily seen the whole path for you. Um, so that's what we dive into more, right? It's like
Dude,
just
and
saying, like,
I want to cut you off and say one thing real quick because I think what you're doing also is, and I know this is someone you coach, but like what you're coaching on and what you're doing is you're asking the obvious question I think to the advisor, it's such an obvious question, but to the
yeah,
actual prospect, it's not necessarily an obvious question.
exactly.
What do you mean by rough planning? Or so you haven't mapped anything out? Like,
Yeah,
I saw that and I'm like chuckling in my mind. I'm like, that is so good because you just want, and I don't even, we're going to go to what he says next here, but like,
yeah.
it's like you ask the obvious question and let them say whatever is going to come out of it and just not that you're playing dumb, but you ask the obvious question.
Yeah. No, and honestly, I like the way that you said playing dumb because it's like, look, the reason that the way that you create that perceived gap or like show them that they kind of don't have the right thing figured out is by making it seem like you already know what, what the solution should be. Um, so again, right, like just asking, as we said here, like, do you haven't mapped anything out? And then kind of getting into here where it's like, I think there's like a missing screenshot. Oh no, no, it's right here. Yeah. So he says like, no, not yet. Maybe I should. Doesn't hurt to save on taxes, right? So again, like not every conversation is going to go like this. Obviously, the reason I'm showing it is because it worked out. There's a bunch of
Right.
conversations that aren't going to be as easy. I'll actually show you there is some objection handling involved right after this. But the one piece I do want to pick out is that obviously the reason we even got to this is like if you compare it to what he was saying earlier, where it's like nothing urgent. Now he's like, yeah, I mean, maybe I should because you've built that gap in their head, right? So a lot of this, like, I'm sure a lot of people here have gone through like sales training in some capacity. This might be similar to the process you use on a discovery call, right? The reason that it's like, we do this in the DMs is because look, like it's obviously great when you can get people on a call, but just the way that LinkedIn is nowadays, they don't really want to get on a call without knowing what's in it for me, right? That's what makes it hard. But this way, once you have somebody on a discovery call, first of all, you can have tons of conversations on LinkedIn because people are less opposed to it, right? It's like what we call low stress. They don't have any obligation to be in front of a camera with you. They don't have any obligation to speak to you if they don't want to. So it's low stress. That's how you can start a bunch of conversations. But now, by the time you get on that discovery call that I'm about to show, like gets booked in here, you already have a pain point. You already know there's interest in solving it. And as an advisor, obviously that makes it a lot easier to move to the next step instead of having to do the whole sales process on the call. Um, but this piece is really important. I think this is also where a lot of people go wrong where like once you even get to the pain point, it's very easy to get over eager and kind of jump on top of that and be like, oh yeah, I can help you with whatever, whatever, X, Y, and Z. I've built plans for so many different people, whatever, right? What you want to do is I call it just maintaining the frame, right? The frame of authority. Where like obviously authority is a strong word, but that's kind of what it is. I think a lot of advisors when they DM, they approach it as, desperation, where it's like, I really need a client, right? Or like, oh, I can help this person. Like, how do I tell them that I can help them? What you want to do is like you're the one that's helping the prospect. Like you're basically changing their life, right? If they eventually get your help. And so you want to frame it that way as well. It's very casual. You want it to be a very lighthearted call offering. And so this is the way I actually recommend like everyone does it, where it's like opening, getting on a call and chatting about how I've done it for my other meta client, right? Should have some time later this week. So you can see how that's a very like lighthearted call offering where it's not high stress, it's not very demanding, it's not a pitch either, right? It's just like, oh, I'm opening, getting on a call and showing you like kind of what we do. Right? I'm just walking through the process and see if it makes sense, right?
Mhm.
Um, Again, objection handling always comes into play. And look, this is the reason why, right? Like people will say this all the time, where it's like I'm a bit cautious of getting into calls, right? Like they're kind of tired of getting sold things, and that's why offering calls from the start without any sort of trust or relationship is hard. It's a very casual objection handle, though. It's just like, yeah, like just to get a better picture of your scenario, I can see what I've, shown you what I've done for other people if it makes sense. Otherwise, no worries. You want it to be lighthearted because like basically I don't like the hard sell mentality because that kind of differs from what we said in the beginning, right? It's like you're in this to help people. If you know you can help them, you should show them that path. But if they're at the point where it's like they need the hard close, they may not be the best fit anyways, right? It may be really hard to
Right.
convert that the next step. And then eventually this just gets into a booked call. So obviously this is like a quick run through. I mean, this is I can
This
obviously go
this is
through.
good though, dude. Like the examples of the questions, I think it's just good to see that. And one more thing before we open the Q&A for the group, if we want to spend a couple minutes on it, like you mentioned, like some of the harder flowing conversations where it's like I get these objections. Like maybe we go over a couple examples there, and then we'll open up the Q&A in a couple minutes here.
Gotcha. Yeah, you mean like the prospects that are just harder to kind of push the
Yeah,
step
yeah.
or okay. The one thing I'll say, let me go back and look, this will actually show you a good example of differing conversations. This is just like five different conversations. There's obviously so many more. But you'll see how long this one is compared to the other ones. Like it just really differs, right? It just really depends on the conversation. Yeah, so I mean, this is one example again, right? So like this prospect, just to give you like a background, this is someone who's like he has a young family, right? I know that's a common focus for a lot of advisors, just people that are young in their careers. I guess if you can say the Henry demographic, if that's what you want to call it. Um, Really like one of the things that comes up all the time with these people is like, look, they know the reason they're a good prospect. A lot of the advisors I work with focus on this niche is because it's an important time, obviously an important time to get the plan set up and everything. But also like they're very, very busy, right? Not to say other people aren't busy, but especially if they have young kids, that's kind of what they talk about in this conversation, right? The kids make the timing tough, all of those factors. So that's something you have to navigate, right? That's why I say like when you're objection handling, you just want to frame it as like, yeah, it's not really something that's going to take that long. We're just going to sit down for a few minutes. We're going to chat through it, right? So here in this example for to show you, and this is a pain point here, right? Where it's like eventually they get to the pain point where he says like, yeah, like something's definitely creep up with the surprise, especially the surprise ones, makes it hard to plan. Have you guys planned it out for the long term, right? One good thing that I think advisors can really do, especially the ones that are like young. I work with a lot of advisors that are actually pretty young and early in their careers as well. I also do like some group training with advisor teams for like the newer advisors. The biggest benefit is that you can resonate with the prospect, right? Where it's like if you're an advisor who's young and you're talking to a person who has a young family, you're kind of in the, similar position. You can resonate with them. But again, to get to your point about the objection handling, here he says like I'm open to chatting, but I want to be mindful of time, as I said, like what do you want to walk through and how long? So it's really just, laying that out simply. Um, Let me get to this one's a similar one. So with the
I
founder.
think that question you asked there too is really good. It's like, well, have you mapped that out for the long term? Like using like
Yeah.
even that word for the long term, because then he's like, we've talked about a high level, but not fully mapped out. And then where did it go after that? Let me just see. Oh, and that's where it's like, hey, open to chatting. And yeah,
Yes, yeah. So
cool, cool,
basically, after
cool.
this, he says like I wouldn't say it's fully mapped out. It's more of a general plan. So like these are kind of the pain points that you want to surface, right? Like kind of going back to your point earlier, where it's like when you know your ICP and you can ask the questions where like they know that this is something important, but it hasn't necessarily resonated with them yet enough to solve it. You want to paint that gap, right? So again, like as an advisor, he already knows that like this person in this situation, they generally might have like a rough idea, but they don't have that long-term specific plan that they need. And that's exactly what he brings out of him, right? So overall, like the goal of any and every single one of these conversations will have one example of this. But basically, the goal of the conversation is to uncover the pain point where like people aren't convinced by you telling them something. They're convinced when they tell themselves, right?
Yeah.
And that's what the whole conversation strategy is about. So once that's surfaced, now it's just kind of offering that call and working through some of the objection handling. Honestly, like there's probably so many more examples. I just have to really dive
Yeah,
deeper into
no,
finding.
totally.
But
And I
yeah,
think we could even pivot to Q&A here and you could stop
yeah,
sharing, brother. This has been great. Anyone in the group that wants to ask a question and dive deeper on something, go right ahead. And if no one does, I will gladly ask more questions.
Yeah, I got one. Rivik, what's going on, man?
what's up,
Um,
man? How's it going?
Appreciate this. This was awesome. Yeah, I was wondering, just was thinking about those different like profile types or ideal client types. Do you feel like the approach changes at all depending on the type of person they are, whether that is somebody in healthcare that's maybe more serious versus somebody in tech that's maybe laid back or whatever the case may be? You feel like it matters, like how you engage?
Yeah, I will definitely say it matters. But the other piece I'll add is I don't think it matters to a very strong extent, right? Like I wouldn't completely change the conversation approach. That's why like this kind of thing that I talked about, it works for all niches. I've worked with advisors across niches, as I said. But you are right on the fact that it's
What
like,
niches do you work with advisors? Could you even give examples? Because I think that'd
yeah,
just be interesting to hear from the group. I mean, I'm playing dumb asking this question, but I would just
yeah.
love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. So one of my advisors that has had the most success, obviously in tech, like equity compensation in tech, with planning for all of that. He's out in the Bay Area. I actually just made a YouTube video on it, shameless YouTube plug. But with that one, the other one, that's really common that a lot of people like is the medical niche. But getting even more specific than that, one niche that's been really good for one of the advisors I work with, actually from Northwestern, is residents. So like residents who are finishing up their residency, they're about to become attendings. That's like a perfect stage because their income is kind of going from whatever it is in residency. I don't even know, like 40, 50, 60 grand till, 400, 500 plus eventually. So that's a big one. And then deeper in medical, like people who actually like own medical practices, that's a big one with like whether it's a physician group or a dentist group, whatever it is, that's a strong one. As I said, like young families, high earner, not rich yet, that demographic is a big one. The other piece with business owners, I think a big myth on LinkedIn is that you can't target blue collar business owners. I will like vehemently defend that you can. There's a lot of them on there that we've actually had quite a lot of success with. So business owners, and that actually goes with the point that I think Jake, right? Was it Jake?
Yeah.
Yeah, that Jake just made. Like I can actually dive into that a little bit for you, where like they're older business owners, so obviously like there's a little bit of a different approach. And then just business owners generally speaking, who like kind of similar to like what you said earlier, Mando, like about obviously they're maybe exiting or whatever the case may be. That's a common one. Honestly, there's so many. Like I have some guys that focus on pilots, actually, believe it or not. Pilots is one that we've had. Some
I
get
just
very,
think it's
very,
good to hear how diverse that is because
yeah,
like I've worked with a lot of people in tech. My niche has evolved. I literally just rebranded my profile last week.
yeah,
And like people think that tech is the only industry you can get in front of on LinkedIn because I have 50,000 followers and that's who I've got in front of. But like I try to articulate the thing of I don't have 50,000 followers because I work with people in tech. I
yeah,
just happen to jive with these people because of what my personality is.
yeah,
There's way more niches that you could get in front of. And
yeah,
even in our group, I could think like Rick, who's on the call, I know has success with dentists, and I know what's it called? Kyle, who I see, and Jake also, like they're working with people in the medical niche. Like I know there's other people working with different industries and it works.
yeah,
I think the biggest thing to drill down on there though, off of Jake's question, not to interject too much, but
yeah. I will get back to
like
it though.
even
I
the
do
blue
want to.
collar business owners, I would love to hear you're like, okay, it's a different approach. They're typically nearing the end of their career as opposed to being like a young family starting. Like, how would you differently approach that
Yeah.
with people like them?
Yeah, that's a good question because it also ties back into what Jake was saying, which I did want to get to. So just first though, like to kind of cover that point before, when I say like a different conversation, honestly, the biggest thing that comes into play is just the cadence, right? And actually also going with this question that's in the chat, like people who are non-chatty and take time to respond, it's kind of a similar topic. The more professional someone is, maybe the more, experienced they are in their career. Obviously, it depends. Some people are very active on LinkedIn, but just in general, the way you want to treat it is like you can just think about it as whenever that pain point comes up in your head that like this is relevant for that person, you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, right? I'd say that's probably my biggest answer. And even with Jake, where it's like when you're talking about people who maybe are in a different niche, where maybe like blue collar business owners, for example, they're slower to respond. Maybe they have their guard up a little bit more on getting sold. What you want to do is like when you have that question in mind that, okay, this is something that's probably relevant to them, you don't want to be afraid to ask it. I think that feedback has helped a lot where it's like, even if that means the conversation's a lot quicker, honestly, in like the one I showed you, that's one of the quicker examples for those conversations. And look, there's going to be so many examples where like people might ghost you. They may not answer your questions, right? They may feel like you're selling them something, which is totally okay. Until you get no's, you're not going to get yeses, right? That's just the nature of how sales works. But hopefully that sheds a little bit of light. Like I would say, don't be afraid to ask your questions, but
Could you
don't
just give an
hold.
example of that too? Like what you mean, maybe like a time that that's happened for someone and like a question they've asked where it's like, don't be afraid to ask the question when it comes in your mind. Like, what's an example of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's a good one. Honestly, I'm gonna share my screen. But Jake, did that cover your question a little bit? Like, did that make sense?
It was awesome, man. I appreciate it. It's funny that you mentioned the blue collar business owners too, just because a buddy of mine, that's his target audience, and he said to me numerous times, "I don't feel like going to LinkedIn is the right move because I don't think they're on there and like I can have success." So I'm gonna come
Yeah.
back and be like, "Dude, you're totally wrong."
Yeah. No, and definitely tell me to check out some of my posts. I talk about that all the time. Just because I'm
And
actually from.
and guys, Rivik just said about his YouTube channel, like check his YouTube channel out.
Yeah.
Dude, I feel like we both started similar time on YouTube, but like if you want to go way deeper on this, I haven't watched your YouTube videos yet, but I imagine your YouTube videos are like
Yeah.
probably step by step on a bunch of the stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I appreciate the plug. But actually let me go back to what you said, that example of like kind of as you
Yeah.
were saying about one of those questions. So I'll show an example here. This is from one of my clients. His name is Brandon. And this is a conversation that he converted. And what you'll see is this is such a long conversation, right? Like one of the things I always clarify is not all conversations are going to be the same length, right? Sometimes, as we said, like you might have to keep following up with people consistently to get them to stay engaged. They have a big conversation back and forth about like the personal side, Yankees, Giants. They're from the same place in Connecticut. And I'll show you the example of the question once it comes up here, right? Like this is the question where he's had this conversation for so long as we just kind of scrolled through. The prospect asking like just basically generally speaking, like what are you up to? It's more of just like a casual conversation. But then from there, he obviously like honestly, I feel like this is a little bit too long, but nonetheless, he talks about what he does as an advisor. And then he asks this types of question, right? He asked a question where, as I said, like for prospects that are maybe slow to respond, this conversation was months long, right? They're slow to respond. You feel like the conversation's slow moving. Just ask maybe a more forward of a question. It's like, oh, like after you talk about, what he does in his business, like how do you keep track of your financial goals, right? Just kind of bridging back off of like what he's saying. You're just trying to get an understanding of where they're at, right? And obviously I can critique every single question. But he answers because they've had such a long conversation. They've built a good relationship. He says, I have a bunch of high yield savings. And now this really gets into what you're asking in terms of like more bold of a question where it's like, are you saving up for a big purchase in the future, right? Because he says, I have a high yield saving. Like, are you saving up for something? He says, hoping to pay off my house. They actually talked about their house early on, like how he bought a house. He asked what rate he has, right? He says it's like close to 7%, hoping to refinance. And then from here, he says, I think we're at 3.1%. And then this is what I would say is like a pretty bold question that actually ends up working out because of the relationship they've built. He says, like, have you thought about what to do with all that cash, right? Like, other than just sitting in a high yield savings account, have you considered other options? Um, and again, it's like, are you seeing higher returns? Obviously, he doesn't necessarily want to say like that he's seeing higher returns, but he's just framing the picture of like there are other options. So this hopefully answers the question a little bit, where it's like when conversations are slow moving, just ask bold questions, and that can move a lot of them forward. And then this actually became a client for him, and this was one of his best clients that he's had. But yeah, overall, like that, hopefully that gives a little bit of a picture. Like the types of questions that they're kind of
Yeah.
bold, they're more, I guess, pitchy, you can say. But in some situations where like the conversation's slow moving, you don't want to delay it for no reason, right? You want to ask good questions, especially if you know you can help somebody.
Well, two things on that that I want to call out too that I think are important, and you can stop sharing your screen. Like, it's it's like one, you want to be having multiple conversations at once. Like everyone else asks me, how many messages do I send? And I'm like, it's not about how many, it's about how many quality conversations can you have. That's really what's more important. Because you could do 50 cold outreach every single day and they could be garbage, or you could do 10 that are really good conversations that are actually like well thought out and you're getting in the game there. But you that doesn't mean you can't do more than 10 theoretically, right? So I think the
Yeah.
number matters because they will take some more massaging to get to that point, but you'll have a higher likelihood of conversion when you do qualify someone and get them to show you pain points. I think that's something too. But I think the other thing and the commonality I'm seeing is actually something that I coach, like some of the advisors I just coach on their business in general when it comes to like client retention. I have significantly higher client retention when they actually implement my advice. So why am I bringing that up and how does it correlate? I like to go to my clients when I have a new client and I'm like, let's just knock out the easy, quick wins, easy to understand advice, things that I'm not going to have to do a 40-minute presentation over to get them to understand why they should implement it. Like, let's just do like the quick, easy wins right off the bat, get four, five, six things out of the way. Now, by our second, third, fourth meeting, when we're going over some more complex topics, some more complex things that take a little bit of education and walking them through presentations for things, they're more inclined to implement the big things because I've proven myself and built up some
Yeah.
trust
Good
on the
point.
little ones. So like
Yeah.
I relate that to these. It's like when you've had 10, 12 messages, if it's five or six messages back and forth, like you're in that deep of the conversation that they feel a level of there's a level of reciprocity that gets built up that when you ask
Yeah.
that question, they feel an obligation to at least answer something. And I
Yeah.
think that's what you're building up more than anything that leads to the opportunities.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And then the one thing I'll even add to that is like with this strategy, like the advisors I work with, I think I talked earlier about lead quality issues. That's a big problem. A lot of people, maybe if they're using lead gen services or just kind of doing the pitch approach or whatever, none of the advisors I've ever worked with have actually had a no-show to date. So they haven't had a no-show on a call. Obviously, like a reschedule or something is different. And I'm mentioning that because I know a lot of advisors do struggle with that, especially if they're kind of on a marketing agency or on a lead gen agency or something. The lead quality can suffer. Here, as you said, like since you had a relationship, they feel like they kind of owe you something, where it's at least the respect of telling you that I'm going to be late to the call or I have to move the call or whatever. I'd say that's a piece I'd like to add as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's get any other questions. We got 7 minutes. If anyone wants to ask something.
Yeah, I got something. Ritmik, super good stuff today. My question is like, help us understand the journey from going from trying to replicate some of the awesome DM sequences that you've shown and taught on with your existing clients and the art of like creating our own style. Because I feel like I'll speak for myself personally. If I'm starting those conversations in like a softer, more genuine place, I will almost always like talk longer than I need to or extend the conversation into like personal things and like don't get to the point, which I will use as the excuse if I'm trying to build the relationship, which is important. Like that's the whole basis of today, right? Is like establish some sort of like trust and be a real person. And then on the back end, like you can make the ask because you've actually spent some time with the person. But like, can you go too far with it? Is my question. And then just a quick comment before you answer. I think one of the things I noticed in the DM sequence I thought was really good is in the first one you showed us that converted, when you asked the question, like the clarification on the pain point, you followed it up with like another personal question right after it to like
Yeah.
soften them.
That's a
You were
good
like,
pickup.
hey, like tell me more about this thing. And then you're like, oh, by the way, like going out to the Bay Area next week. Like, and you like followed it up with like a personal conversation
Yeah.
and like went back to that softer space. So I thought
That's a
that
good
was
line.
like
Yeah.
something really cool I noticed too.
Yeah.
So
No, but also great question, and I love it, right? And look, the one thing I always say is actually like one of my taglines, it's actually on my LinkedIn banner, my YouTube banner. It's like your clients work with you for a reason and you want to embrace that, right? And so that kind of
yeah,
goes to your point where it's like I tell everyone I work with and everyone using the strategy is like I'm not gonna that's why I don't tell you like this is the exact message you should send or even like this sequence is exactly what you should do. And you'll see even in these examples I showed, like every conversation is a different length. So I'll honestly tell you, I don't think you can go too far with building a personal connection, to be honest. Because if you think about, and I'm sure like a lot of the people in here will say that if they think about their strongest clients or the clients that they love working with most, you probably have a really strong personal connection with them that has nothing to do with their business or their job or anything related to finance, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to treat it the same way where like when you're having these conversations initially, right? Like I also say like the prospecting and getting a client doesn't start with like when you get on a call with them. It starts from the very first interaction, and every interaction in between that makes a big difference. So I actually would say like if you're that type of person where you have so much personal stuff to talk about, I think that's a benefit. I think that's a strong point that you want to embrace. So when you're having those conversations, if you can be more personal than the other advisors that this person's talking to and you can share more, build a stronger connection, I think that's a benefit, honestly. I wouldn't stress it. And if anything, it actually makes it easier to convert that into like one of those pain points or whatever because I've seen
yeah,
so many times if you have a strong enough relationship, that person might even bring up like on their own. It's like, oh, I've actually been thinking about this recently. Like, you seem like a good guy.
yeah.
Like, you want to get on a phone and talk about it, right? And I've had a bunch of advisors get clients just by that. So my opinion will always be like,
That's, dude,
don't
I was
hold
gonna
back the
say that.
relationship.
I wanted to add that most of my clients, and I will tell you, Kyle, exactly what Rivik just said. Like we like I never even brought business up and we're just like going, but it's through LinkedIn. And then they just bring up naturally. They're like, hey
Right.
dude, like I might not be your client, but like I've been thinking about this. And meanwhile, I'm like, you're literally my ideal client. And you're saying
Right.
I might not be your client. Like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you only make $600,000 a year? Sorry, I'm gonna have to think about this. Like
Well, if I can continue, and if anybody else has a
yeah.
question, tell me to shut up, and I'll
No,
let somebody else.
you're good because I think we'll
Um,
like we'll finish on this and then Rivik, I'll let you plug anything you want to after we finish up. But go ahead.
yeah, no, that I mean that makes a ton of sense too because if you're able to, we don't know how the god of the algorithm works, like none of us do, but I imagine if you're extending conversations in DMs with certain people, that's got. I mean, we know the content's going to show up in the feed, like you're going to continue to be in their ecosystem too, like as you continue to post content, and then as that happens, right, like you're just providing additional social proof without actually needing to bring it up to them specifically in the DMs, because like
Yeah, it's
they're
a good
just
point.
seeing all your stuff as you continue
Yeah.
to bring. Um, Tactical question, like so, Ridvik, if we're trying to come up with just like use the analogy of like build the muscle, right? So would you recommend kind of like building your, we'll call it like your niche sales navigator filter? And then follow up to that, like, do you have like a number of connection requests that you're trying to send every single day? And then are you starting all these conversations for the most part off of like, hey, they accepted the connection request. I'm going to go through those recent connections and like start these organic conversations. Like, how are you? Is that like
Yeah. I gotcha.
profile
Like,
views, new connections, and then like what else are you
yeah.
using to start? the
Yeah,
conversation.
the workflow basically. So yeah, as I said before too, like on the Sales Navigator, once you kind of have that list set up, you get 200 requests for the week. So I recommend everybody max that out. Honestly, the cadence in terms of like how you split it up, I don't think it matters much. Like you can do all 200 on one day, you can do it 50 a day for 4 days. Like it's really just whatever fits your schedule, honestly. And then to answer your question, like yeah, it's like I don't know if you're set up on Condo or if you've heard of Condo. Condo's the best. Like you can go in
Yeah.
there so you can see your recent connections. You can organize all the people that you've messaged or you haven't messaged. You have to set reminders, whatever. I would recommend getting set up on that. And then yeah, like you basically hit the nail on the head. You look at your most recent connections and just go up the list and look at their profile for a minute or so and send your DM. That's basically the workflow if that answers your question.
Dude, so good today. Like, so helpful. I
Yeah,
appreciate you
appreciate
coming
it.
on. Anything you want to plug just in closing here before we wrap up?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously I work with advisors. I don't think that's a mystery at this point. But really the way my program works, like obviously everything I went on here, there's only so much you can fit into 1 hour. Really the biggest piece of everything I do is kind of similar to actually Kyle's question where you're very different as an advisor from everyone else. You're going to have some characteristics that differentiate you, and every single other advisor does too, right? So really the piece that we focus on, and like in my program, it's all one-on-one. So we'll go through a one-on-one process. It's 180 days basically starting from where you are now to either maybe getting a few clients on LinkedIn inconsistently, maybe you're not able to convert conversations. I'll work with you one on one, implement the strategy for your niche specifically. The biggest piece is that we're just constantly communicating every single day. So all my advisors, they'll send me screenshots of their conversations and I'll give them feedback on it basically over and over again until they kind of understand the strategy on their own. And the goal for most advisors I work with, once we get to the end of the 180 days, is they're consistently able to add at least 2 to 3 ideal clients every month. And it's kind of on purpose. Like we don't really want to go after the clients. I mean, unless you want to, but for most people, it's like just 2 to 3 clients and that, being in the good range that they need. That's what we want to do moving forward. And the biggest piece I can say is the consistency, right? Like even if you get clients here and there, I'm sure everyone here would agree that like that consistent pipeline is a really crucial piece, and that's the piece that we want to provide. What I'll also say that I want to set up, so I have a Calendly link. Obviously, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and feel free to shoot me a message there or whatever. But I did set up a link just for being on this call for Mando inviting me. If you book a call with me with this link, you'll get a little bit of a incentive, in terms of if you're interested in joining the program. So that's all I have for now. I
And
also my
I'll I'll
YouTube as
I'll
well.
save that link for everybody, and for anyone who's not here that's watching the recording, I'll make sure I put this in the recap of the call.
Cool, I appreciate it. And then yeah, YouTube as well. Obviously, it's just under my name. It's linked on my LinkedIn as well. So you'll get a lot of the advice I talked about here, a lot more in depth as well. That'll be on my YouTube.
Cool. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Everybody else, great to see you.
Guys.
Talk to you all soon.
Yeah, thank you guys for attending as well. I appreciate it. And thanks, Mando.